This
We
would
like to
be
stay in bed and read and watch movies and play around. Keep each other company.
Before the awards, before the legendary concerts, before the world knew her simply as Barbra Streisand, there was something about her that Hollywood could never quite explain. It wasn't just the voice that could silence an entire room. It wasn't just the extraordinary talent, it was something harder to define, a presence people never forgot. Her intelligence was sharp, her confidence unmistakable, and her independence unlike anything Hollywood had seen before. And naturally, people were curious about the powerful men who briefly entered that extraordinary orbit. Some were famous actors, one was a charismatic prime minister, and another would one day become king. Now, looking back across decades of fame, those intriguing encounters remain some of the most fascinating chapters in the extraordinary life of Barbra Streisand. Omar Sharif, the charming stranger. In the late 1960s, Hollywood was buzzing with excitement around the musical phenomenon Funny Girl. The film would change Barbra Streisand forever, launching her from Broadway sensation to international film star. And working beside her was one of the most charismatic actors of the era, Omar Sharif. Sharif was already a global heartthrob after his legendary performances in Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. Tall, elegant, and impossibly charming, he carried an aura that few actors could match. From the moment cameras began rolling, observers noticed something unusual between the two stars. Their chemistry felt effortless. Between takes, Sharif would often tease Streisand with playful humor, while she responded with her sharp wit and unmistakable confidence. Crew members later recalled that the two spent long hours talking about music, cinema, and life far beyond Hollywood. For Streisand, who had often felt like an outsider in the glamorous film industry, Sharif's attention was both flattering and intriguing. But their connection was complicated. At the time, Sharif was married, and the cultural differences between them created quiet tension behind the scenes. Still, rumors of a brief romantic closeness followed the production of Funny Girl. Neither star ever fully confirmed what happened during those months of filming. Yet decades later, Sharif would speak warmly of Streisand, once describing her as one of the most extraordinary women I ever met. Perhaps that was the truth of their story. Not a scandal, not a headline, just two remarkable artists meeting at the exact moment their stars were rising and sharing a spark that Hollywood never quite forgot. And in Streisand's extraordinary life, it was only the beginning. Kris Kristofferson, the wild poet of Hollywood. By the early 1970s, Barbra Streisand had already conquered Broadway and Hollywood. But when she stepped into the ambitious remake of A Star is Born in 1976, she found herself working opposite a man who seemed to come from an entirely different world. That man was Kris Kristofferson. Kristofferson wasn't the polished Hollywood leading man audiences were used to. He was rough around the edges, a former Rhodes Scholar turned country singer whose gravelly voice and rebellious spirit had already made him a legend in music. From the very first day on set, their dynamic was electric. Streisand was meticulous, thoughtful, and deeply involved in shaping every detail of the film. Kristofferson, on the other hand, brought a raw unpredictability that seemed to challenge her in ways few actors ever had. Their characters were locked in a passionate, complicated love story on screen. But as the weeks of filming stretched on, many around the production noticed how natural their chemistry felt, even when the cameras stopped rolling. Long conversations continued after shooting, wrapped each evening. Sometimes about music, sometimes about fame, sometimes about the strange loneliness that comes with living in the spotlight. Kristofferson admired Streisand's discipline and brilliance. She, in turn, seemed fascinated by his restless spirit, a man who carried both poetry and rebellion in equal measure. Hollywood, of course, began whispering. Was their connection purely professional? Or had something deeper briefly formed between the two stars during those intense months of filming? Neither ever spoke openly about any off-screen romance, But what audiences witnessed in A Star Is Born felt undeniably real, a kind of emotional truth that rarely appears by accident. And even today, decades later, their performances remain one of the most memorable musical pairings in film history. For Streisand, Kristofferson represented something rare. A man who didn't seem intimidated by her power. A man who met her brilliance with his own quiet intensity. And for a brief moment in Hollywood's golden era, their paths crossed in a way fans are still talking about nearly half a century later. Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister who fascinated Hollywood. In the early 1970s, Barbra Streisand was already one of the most recognizable women in the world. Her concerts sold out in minutes, her films drew massive audiences, and her name alone carried the kind of cultural influence few performers ever achieved. But across the border in Canada, another figure was creating his own wave of global fascination. That man was Pierre Trudeau. Trudeau was not a typical politician. He was charismatic, intellectual, and surprisingly stylish for a world leader. Newspapers around the world wrote about what they called Trudeau-mania. Crowds followed him the way fans followed rock stars. And somehow, these two powerful personalities found themselves in the same orbit. Their connection reportedly began during a dinner gathering in the 1970s when Streisand was visiting Canada. What was meant to be a polite meeting between a political leader and a global celebrity quickly turned into something more intriguing. Those present later recalled how easily the two fell into conversation. Streisand, known for her sharp intelligence and strong opinions, seemed genuinely interested in Trudeau's ideas about politics, culture, and global change. Trudeau, in turn, appeared captivated by her confidence and artistic brilliance. The dinner stretched late into the evening. Guests noticed the two laughing, debating, and leaning closer as the night continued. Soon, whispers began circulating in both political circles and Hollywood columns. Could a world-famous singer and a sitting prime minister actually share a romantic spark? The rumors only intensified when Streisand later spoke warmly about Trudeau in interviews, describing him as incredibly charming and deeply intelligent. Yet the truth of what happened between them that night was never fully revealed. Perhaps it was simply a fascinating conversation between two extraordinary people. Or perhaps, for one brief moment, the worlds of politics and Hollywood quietly collided in a way few ever expected. Whatever the case, the mysterious connection between Streisand and Trudeau remains one of the most intriguing stories from that unforgettable era. And for a woman whose life has crossed paths with artists, presidents, and kings, it would not be the last surprising chapter. Warren Beatty, Hollywood's most notorious romantic. By the 1970s, Barbra Streisand had become one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. She was no longer just a performer. She was a creative force who controlled her music, shaped her films, and commanded enormous respect throughout Hollywood. And during that same era, one name seemed to appear in nearly every conversation about romance in the film industry: Warren Beatty. Beatty had a reputation that bordered on legend. Charismatic, intelligent, and endlessly charming, he was known for captivating nearly every room he entered. Directors admired his ambition. Actors respected his talent. And Hollywood gossip columns often described him as the most irresistible man in the business. It was almost inevitable that Beatty and Streisand would eventually cross paths. When they did, the encounter reportedly sparked immediate curiosity among those around them. Both were fiercely intelligent. Both were deeply ambitious. And both had personalities strong enough to dominate any conversation. Friends later described their interactions as lively and playful. Streisand's sharp wit matched Beatty's confident charm, creating the kind of dynamic that rarely went unnoticed. At dinners and social gatherings, the two were often seen laughing together, exchanging jokes, and engaging in long conversations about filmmaking, politics, and the unpredictable nature of fame. Hollywood insiders quickly began speculating. Was their connection simply two powerful stars enjoying each other's company? Or was there something more quietly unfolding behind the scenes? Neither Streisand nor Beatty ever offered clear confirmation of any romance, yet their names were occasionally linked in the swirling gossip of the era. Another chapter in the long list of Hollywood's intriguing what-if stories. What makes the story fascinating is how similar they were. Both were perfectionists. Both had reshaped their careers on their own terms. And both understood the enormous pressure that came with being among the most recognizable figures in the world. For a brief moment in time, two of Hollywood's most powerful personalities shared the same orbit. And like many stories from that glamorous era, the truth of what happened between them remains part mystery and part legend. Prince Charles, the royal fascination. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Barbra Streisand had become more than a Hollywood icon. She was now a global cultural figure whose music, films, and voice had reached audiences across continents. And among those admirers was a man whose life could not have been more different from the world of Hollywood. That man was Charles III, then known to the world simply as Prince Charles. Their unusual connection reportedly began years earlier when Charles saw Streisand perform on film. According to several interviews he later gave, he was immediately captivated by her voice and presence. In fact, the young prince once admitted that he had developed a genuine admiration for the American star. But what began as distant admiration eventually turned into something far more intriguing. In the mid-1970s, the two reportedly met during a Hollywood visit. To many observers, the encounter seemed almost surreal. A future king meeting one of the most powerful women in the entertainment world. Yet those present said the two spoke easily with each other. Charles was known for his thoughtful curiosity and quiet sense of humor. Streisand, meanwhile, was never intimidated by status or titles. She spoke her mind, even in rooms filled with royalty. Their conversations reportedly touched on music, charity work, and the unusual pressure of living under constant public attention. Over time, the two would cross paths again at different events and gatherings. And with every meeting, the curiosity surrounding their friendship grew stronger. Some observers believed there was a genuine warmth between them, a mutual admiration that went beyond polite conversation. Others simply saw it as one of those unusual moments when two completely different worlds briefly intersect. Years later, Charles himself would still speak fondly of Streisand, describing her talent with great admiration. Whether their connection was simply friendship or something more fleeting has never been fully clarified, but the image remains unforgettable, a Hollywood legend and a future king. Two lives from opposite sides of the world, briefly connected in a story that still fascinates fans today. Ryan O'Neal, a Hollywood friendship that sparked rumors. By the mid-1970s, Barbra Streisand had already established herself as one of the most influential performers in Hollywood. Directors respected her instincts, musicians admired her voice, and audiences across the world saw her as a once-in-a-generation star. Around the same time, another actor was dominating the film industry with his own remarkable rise. That man was Ryan O'Neal. After the massive success of Love Story in 1970, O'Neal became one of the most recognizable leading men in Hollywood. His charm, confidence, and boyish appeal made him a favorite among audiences and filmmakers alike. It was almost inevitable that the two stars would eventually move within the same social circles. Hollywood in those years was surprisingly small. Parties, premieres, and private gatherings often brought the biggest names together in intimate settings, far from cameras and flashing lights. During several of these gatherings, Streisand and O'Neal reportedly shared warm and friendly conversations. Observers often noticed how naturally they seemed to connect, two successful artists navigating the strange pressures of celebrity life. Friends later recalled moments of laughter between them, playful teasing, and long discussions about the unpredictable nature of fame. Before long, their growing friendship became a subject of speculation in Hollywood gossip columns. Were they simply enjoying each other's company as colleagues in the same industry? Or had their connection briefly crossed into something more personal? As with many stories from that glamorous era, neither star ever publicly confirmed the rumors. Both continued focusing on their careers while their names occasionally resurfaced in entertainment headlines. Yet their connection remains part of the fascinating tapestry of Streisand's life, a reminder of how often Hollywood legends crossed paths behind the scenes. For fans looking back on those decades today, it is another glimpse into the mysterious and captivating world that surrounded one of entertainment's most remarkable women. For more than 60 years, Barbra Streisand has lived a life few performers could ever imagine. Her voice shaped generations of music lovers, her films defined an era of cinema, and her presence transformed her into one of the most powerful women in Hollywood history. Along the way, her path crossed with actors, politicians, musicians, and even royalty. Some connections were brief, some remained mysterious, and some became stories that fans still discuss decades later. But perhaps that is the magic of Hollywood's golden era, a world where extraordinary people met in extraordinary moments. And sometimes, those moments became unforgettable legends. If you enjoy discovering the hidden stories behind Hollywood's greatest icons, be sure to subscribe to Legendary Archives, where the legends of the past are remembered and their untold stories continue to live on.